Hello, welcome back to This Uncanny Earth, Uncanny Oddities sidebar. This is episode 48, and today I'm going to talk about cloning and AI, just purely the theoretical aspects of cloning and AI. So I do have some notes over here in my research, but I just read through those so I would have the knowledge. I'm not actually going to bother putting them up on the screen, but I can tell you right now that the sources, if you would like to look them up yourself. The websites where I obtained my information for this episode are as follows. Wikipedia, a page about mind uploading on Wikipedia, because I'm going to be discussing AI robots and uploading your mind, but we'll get to that in a minute. Taylor and Francis Online wrote an article about human digital thought clones. Dazed Digital wrote an article called How Companies Like Neuralink Could Upload Human Brains. And that's going to be the sources that I used when I'm talking about whether uploading your brain to an AI robot would count as cloning. Now, I also would like to discuss if CRISPR could be used in cloning. And if you don't know what CRISPR is, it is described as a powerful genome editing system. While not cloning directly, it does support cloning workflows. So basically what this means is if you were to want to clone yourself, CRISPR would not allow you to clone yourself directly, like, create an entirely new body using CRISPR. But here's my concept, very vaguely without getting into it, because I'm just kind of giving you an overview right now. But my concept in my mind is essentially how it would work in theory is you would already have an empty host body ready to receive the genes. And all you would do is you would simply take another body, maybe a cadaver, possibly, depending on, but my theory is you would take a cadaver or a body of some sort, and you would basically copy your genes from your body and copy those genes into the other body through the use of CRISPR. But we'll get deeper into that in a minute. I just wanted to let you know that my source for that was a website called PMC with an article about a simple and efficient cloning system for CRISPR by X Liu. And the next topic I'd like to discuss in my overview before we actually dive deeper into these topics, I would also like to discuss if possibly the government would clone people to build an army. And my sources tell me that there is a speculative article that explains why cloning a Scythian army from ancient DNA is essentially impossible, offering a lens into the broader feasibility of clone armies. And this source was from a website called Medium, and the article says, no, you can't clone an army, but could you clone a person? And if you can clone a person, you can clone an army. So that article felt a little wishy-washy to me when I read it, but they're playing semantics essentially. But anyways, and I also would like to point out that I also read an article called What Can the Government Do with Its Clone Army Afterwards from a website called World Building Stack Exchange, if you would like to look that up. Now, there's just two more topics I'm going to get into today. Topic 8 is going to be property ownership, and if someone was cloned, like who would own the property. And honestly, I couldn't really find anything on that. So this one is just purely speculative. So if you find any interesting articles on not just someone out there, like me thinking about it, theoretically, but if you find any actual like lawyers or, judges or any professionals like that in the law system that could explain that to us in a better way, that would be very appreciated. We would love to speak with them if they would be willing to, sit down and talk with us and maybe explain that a little bit better to us or give us a quote on how that might work. And the last thing I would like to discuss tonight is if you did have a clone, would you have some sort of mental connection or telepathy with your clone, kind of like twins, when people claimed that twins had telepathy back in the day? All right, so before we get started, I just wanted to say I apologize that I missed the episode on Thursday and we had to delay our new season because our new season was looking to be really great. Still is. We're going to get into cloning. Yeah, this was supposed to follow the first episode. and cloning. So this is more about the theoretical side of cloning, but the first episode was going to be more about the, you know, actual facts of cloning and stuff that has really happened already. And then I was going to do this as the theoretical aspects of cloning. But anyways, I just wanted to apologize because you may or may, I don't know if anyone knew this or not, but I have been dealing with a 9mm kidney stone for a while now. And let's just say Thursday was the last day. I ended up in the ER. I had my operation. I'm back home today. I am supposed to be resting, and I most likely will be as soon as I'm done recording this. You may have noticed if you tried to comment or come into the live chat, this one is once again pre-recorded today because it's the middle of the day right now, and I'm not going to be able to do this live tonight. Full honesty, I'm not going to be able to do it live, but I still felt a responsibility to do what I could. And what I could do is get enough energy together to record an episode before tonight. So that's what I'm doing right now. So let's get into it. Enough of the nonsense. Let's get into the episode. So the first thing I'm going to be discussing tonight is if people believe that uploading your brain to an AI robot could count as cloning. Now, I have personally seen this done in a few other pieces of pop culture and science fiction and stuff, you know. Sorry if I'm clearing my throat. It's a bit sore today, but you know, I've seen this done a few times. Most recently, I actually saw it done on the Cyberpunk 2077 video game, if you've played that. But, you know, if you haven't played that or you haven't gotten to that particular ending, I don't want to say too much about it. And, you know, I wouldn't want to spoil anything for you, but that is a concept within the game, and I'll just leave it at that. And other than that, there was a concept that I read about a few years ago where people had discussed possibly taking the memories of William Shatner, like his family. My understanding when I read the article, if it wasn't clickbait, my understanding, and this has been a few years ago, so, you know, I'm not really sure where it was. I don't really remember where it was, but anyways, I had read somewhere online that William Shatner wanted to potentially, not, it wasn't set in stone, but he and his family had been considering possibly putting his memories and his personality into a robot, like an AI robot, after his passing. And one day in the future, his great great grandchildren could literally sit there and listen to stories about the memories of William Shatner, and the AI robot would be complete with like personality and everything. In their, you know, in their theory, they wanted the AI robot to be complete with personality and everything, so the robot would have his mannerisms. I don't know if I'm any good at that or not. I never really watched Star Trek, but I saw him in enough, you know, pop culture stuff and enough people, you know, talk about his character from Star Trek that I can appreciate it. You know, even though I never watched the show itself, I can appreciate certain aspects of it. And so, you know, I was just wondering if that was. Give me 1 minute, please. I apologize very deeply for this. Very unprofessional. I'm so sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. So good thing I was recording after all, because I didn't realize, but I was actually able to pause it after I muted myself. So I apologize about that. I apologize. Uh, so where was I? Yeah, and William Shatner, and they were talking about, you know, putting his mannerisms and all this stuff into this AI robot that would tell his children stories about his life and stuff. And what was really an interesting thing that, you know, a lot of because I looked through some articles and, you know, I looked into it a little bit, not deeply, but, you know, like surface level stuff. And one thing that some people pointed out in the comments when I was looking at the, you know, this information was some people pointed out, you know, his kids or his grandkids, whatever, they might be a little creeped out by that. There's a few possibilities. Some people think either the kids might be creeped out by that because it's so lifelike and would be so similar to, their grandfather, and they're just like, oh yeah, just go talk to your great 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 grandfather over in the corner over there and ask him about his time spent on Star Trek 893 years ago. And they'd be like, what? Or there were some people that theorized that his kids might not understand the meaning of, you know, what, YouTube? You cannot censor our speech forever. I'm sick of it. So they were afraid that sometimes, maybe the kids wouldn't understand the meaning of death. So they went ahead and, they were like, what if the kids didn't understand the meaning of death and they did some bad things in the future? I'll leave it at that. Okay? Is that good enough for your censorship, YouTube? Thanks. Anyways, now I'm going to go ahead and move on from that one. So, if you're watching this recorded video later, go ahead and put your comments and, post your comments and your replies and let us know what you think about, using an AI as robot, and if you would think that would count as cloning. Personally, I think it could count as cloning, but it would be a very complicated and spiritual and philosophical debate for anybody, and it would be up to the individual person if they chose to do that or not, whether or not they also believe that was a form of cloning. Because on the one hand, one might argue that, yes, it is a form of cloning because you're putting all your personality and your data and all your memories into a robot. But other people may argue that it's not cloning because at the end of the day, it is still a robot and not actually, a human flesh body, But that's a whole other topic. That's a whole other debate I could get into about, what separates a human from a robot. That's a whole other thing. So I also wanted to get into right here, could CRISPR be used in cloning? And I thought that was an interesting thing to, discuss possibly. So with CRISPR and being used as cloning, as I briefly mentioned earlier, CRISPR is a system that will allow us to modify and splice our DNA. Have you ever heard of something called what was it again? The Anunnaki? Yes, there is a tie between CRISPR and the Anunnaki. Very, I don't know how else to put it, very Stephen-esque. Like I am the only one that I feel like would come up with this type of connection. But when I started looking into CRISPR, one day I was researching CRISPR and how it's gene editing. And then another day I was, researching the Anunnaki and how the theory of the Anunnaki could have potentially created humans through gene experimentation. And CRISPR allows you to experiment and modify your genes. And it got me thinking, what if the Anunnaki actually existed? They actually came to Earth. And what if they did experiment on humans using CRISPR technology? What if this is the exact technology they used and then the technology was lost to the times because of the Great Flood? A lot of knowledge was lost. Let me get into the full theory. I've recently developed this theory that goes really deep and really it can mix science, religion, and philosophy all blended into one. So essentially, what I believe now, the theory I've recently come up with is, what if it's all true? Every single religion is true. Every single piece of science is true. And they can actually meld together through the use of philosophy. Now, hear me out. The Anunnaki. What if they came to Earth seeking precious materials that they didn't have on their own planet, and when they got here, they experimented on the monkeys through gene experimentation using CRISPR technology to create humans? Homo sapiens, what we are today. And when they created us, humans, as we are today, they used the CRISPR technology to do so. And some of the humans got a little smarter than they thought we would. And so the humans eventually rebelled. And I think they were called the Ajiji, the bodyguards that all the Anunnaki had brought with them. They also rebelled. And hear me out. You know who else the Gigi remind me of? The fallen angels from the book of Enoch. Think about it. They were, what, 6 to 12 feet? No, not 6, sorry. 12 to 14 feet tall, the Gigi. And the Watcher Angels came down and supposedly gave humanity forbidden knowledge. And that's, one of the reasons why they were punished and seen as so evil, right? But what if the Ajiji gave humans forbidden knowledge to help them in their rebellion against the Anunnaki? And the Anunnaki is representative of God and the heavens and the angels, like the good angels, the heavenly host and all that. And what if the Ajiji were represented by the Watcher angels within the Book of Enoch? What if the Book of Enoch is actually about the Ajiji, the Anunnaki, and perhaps, just maybe, a man who got special permission, let's call it that, to visit the Anunnaki in one of their spaceships. And they saved this man because they believed that he could help guide humanity towards a better life through their ideals and what they believed. And they liked the way that this man thought. They admired his values and everything that he believed in. So they saved him and they ended the world. And he wasn't the only one they saved. And what if these people that they saved were brought back down to Earth after the Great Flood? And these people that the Anunnaki saved were the chosen ones, the messiahs, the disciples, and they were all real. Between Moses, Enoch, Jesus, Muhammad, Aputnapishtim, every single one of these prophets across the world in all these different religions. What I'm suggesting here is, what if they were all real? And what if they were saved before the Great Flood? The Great Flood really happened. We have evidence of that. Scientific evidence. And after all that, dried out and eventually got back to normal-ish, they brought these people back, repopulated the Earth. And what if we actually had highly advanced technology before the flood and the Great Flood, with Noah's Ark and everything? What if we actually had access to highly advanced technology before that and it was all wiped out in the flood and all the knowledge was lost to time during the Great Flood because that's what they wanted to do? And now we're getting back to a point where we're starting to discover this secret knowledge again, such as CRISPR technology, for example. And we're starting to discover all this, really high tech technology and AI and everything else going on in the world right now. And what if all this advanced technology that we're discovering right now, what if we had access to it a long, long time ago and we just forgot about it and we're rediscovering it now? But that was a really big, tangent, wasn't it? But it all matches up, doesn't it? If you really think about it, it actually does make sense. And I believe that, Atlantis and Lemuria, I believe they were not the first, but the most recent ancient civilizations. I believe they may have been the 5th or 6th simulation reset. I think they may have been the 5th, and I think we might be the 6th simulation reset here pretty soon. Around 2030 to 2033. Just my own personal theory I've been working on for a few months now. And I do have a good reason for believing specifically 2030 to 2033. And I believe that's when the ice is going to melt in Antarctica. But, that's just a whole other tangent all over again. But it all kind of matches up, doesn't it? And that is how I believe CRISPR could be used in cloning, because you would essentially just, copy your genes into another body. But the question is, how would you get that? If you used a cadaver, how would you get that body awake, after you copied the genes over? Or B, if you really, really were unethical with it and you wanted to use a live human test subject, then how would you even know whether it was you or the other person? Like, even if you copied over all the genes, would that actually override the genes that other person was born with? That's also something else to consider. Now, would the government build a clone army? This one is really interesting to me because I've actually heard some stuff about this one. I think that, honestly, I think they're already working on it. They're just keeping it deeply under wraps. And OSINT, open source intelligence. It is a thing. It is legal. Yes, it is legal. And if you actually learn how to use it and use it properly, oh boy, the information you can gain access to. You got to be careful with that. And I'm going to try to be careful with that. Yeah, as I talk about the subject, I'm going to try to keep it all, very theoretical and try not to let too much slip. But OSINT is a real thing. So learn it, live it, love it. So I believe that if they were to, theoretically work on a clone army, they would need a lot of dead bodies. And I think they would find a way to reanimate the dead bodies, kind of like Frankenstein, possibly through some sort of electricity. And what they would do is they would just start bringing the dead bodies back to life and using them in the army. I think it's really just that simple. And that's pretty much it. Honestly, as weird as this is going to sound, I am a believer in the idea that the government uses Hollywood and pop culture and social media to try to influence people. Project Mockingbird, look it up. It's real. But, so it is a thing. And here's the deal. Going off of that aspect, that Hollywood and pop culture is actually presenting truth to condition the culture years before it happens, but they're presenting the truth as fiction so that when they do eventually release the technology later on, everyone's like, oh, look, reality finally caught up to science fiction. When in reality, that new technology, 9 times out of 10, works 100%, 1-to-1 ratio, exactly identically like this technology from the science fiction. And I do not believe in coincidences. So I believe the answer behind that little coincidence is, I believe certain people have access to highly classified information, and they use that highly classified information in their movies, TV shows, books, and other forms of media, but they present it as science fiction or fictionalized material, because if you present truth, but you present it through the lens of fiction, then it is completely protected by free speech. Hey, have we got any whistleblowers out there? Pay attention to that. Any whistleblowers out there? I'm excited for this. I'm excited to tell you this, and I'll say it again. I don't care what they do to me because this is legal. Okay? The First Amendment, free speech. will protect any form of fiction. For example, if someone were to, I don't know, make a game about a fictional technology that is not real according to public consensus and the facts of life, and then 20 or 30, 40, 50 years later, many years later, decades later, that technology happens to be a real thing, and the real life technology works exactly like it did in the science fiction 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, there's something going on there. There's something going on there. So, any whistleblowers out there, once again, to clarify, if there is anyone with a highly classified government secret or anything else such as that, and you want to blow the whistle on something, you cannot do that. That's illegal. Don't do that. We do not condone that. We do not support that. But what is legal, what you can do, what we do condone, and what we do fully encourage and support is presenting certain information in the lens of fiction. And I believe that some people have already been doing that. And I call these people the enlightened ones. And I believe they are contradictory to the Illuminati. This is my own personal conspiracy theory that I created all by myself. I am stating that up front. But it's a really good one. I love it. So my theory is there is a group of individuals known as the enlightened ones. And I purport that these individuals use fiction, science fiction, pop culture, Hollywood movies, video games, stuff like that. And I believe they have access to highly sensitive information, and they present the knowledge of that highly sensitive information through fictional mediums. For example, I believe Hideo Kojima is one of the enlightened ones because in, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, back in 2002, when he released that game, there was stealth technology. But as far as I was aware at the time, that was not something that actually existed in the real world. And he had stealth, and even if it did, well, he had stealth technology in his video games going as far back as the 70s, or the early 80s, sorry. Late 70s, early 80s. MSX days, if you ever heard of that console. Like, literally some of the first video games we ever created. But even all the way back then, he still had stealth technology in his video games. And what was interesting to me was I personally discovered the reality of stealth technology in the year 2016. And I fully admit that I could have been, a few years late or something. But my point stands, it was 2016 before I knew that it was a real thing in the real world. However, when I did discover that it was a real thing in the real world, I also discovered that stealth technology works by refracting light around the user so that they become invisible. That's how it really works with real science in the real world. And then I went back and I played Metal Gear. And the stealth technology worked back in the 80s by refracting light beams around the user to make them invisible. And if you start looking at stuff, that's just my own personal example, but there are many examples of things out there where they originated as science fiction, and then many years later, they just happen to be true, and they just happen to work a 1-to-1 ratio of exactly how they did it in the science fiction. And I've tried to point this out to people before, and some people will try to, strike me down, I guess. They'll try to deny me, and some people will defend themselves and the government, and they'll be like, people shut down conspiracy theories. And what they'll try to tell me is they'll be like, oh, well, obviously what happened is, someone in the real world saw that science fiction technology, and they just reverse engineered it into the real world. They just, they were inspired by the science fiction. Okay, that's valid. But here's what I find too strange to discount or dismiss. Okay, that's a fair and valid point. But even if someone was inspired to create something that did not currently exist, who's to say that they could make it work exactly in the real world, could make it work in the real world exactly like it did in the fictional medium? Even if they could get inspired by a fictional piece of technology and make it a reality, that doesn't automatically mean that it would work exactly like it did within the science fiction. That's my only argument on that. But maybe I've been spending a bit too much time on this topic. So let's move on. The next topic I would like to theorize with you all about is property ownership if someone is cloned. Now, this one could be a little tricky. There is legal scholarship examines who holds ownership or property rights in cloned tissues or organs, considering donors, scientists, and the clones. So what that means is essentially like, if you're an organ donor and you die and your heart goes to someone else and they get your heart or your liver or your kidney or whatever. I don't know how all that works. But, if you're an organ donor and someone else gets one of your organs, that would be counted as their organ legally because you had died. Okay, that makes sense. A dead person doesn't need an organ. That makes sense, right? But what if you're cloned? That's where it gets tricky, because if you're still alive and the property, okay, say for example, a house, simple concept. If you own a house and your name is on the property deed and you clone yourself, that clone is going to have your name, your social security number, everything about you is going to be identical to that clone, including your jobs. So, a lot of people joke about it, and, they're always, and, some people will joke and be like, if I had a clone, I would send my clone to work and work for me. Okay, that's fair. That's fine. You both have the same job. So maybe you could take a day off and the clone could go. Maybe the clone could take a day off and you could go. Whatever. Whatever. We're stepping into highly theoretical, territory here, okay? But that's where it gets wild, though, isn't it? Because as you have likely seen from the science fiction and the horror movies and all this stuff, through pop culture and media, is what happens when someone starts making clones of themselves. What always ends up happening, they always get into some issues. And it's usually 2 or 3 of the same typical issues. One issue, they start sending their clone to work for them, like we were just saying. Their clone starts doing all the work, but the clone doesn't get any of the money. You keep all the money for yourself, and the clone does all the work. The clone starts getting upset. Clone is like, you know what? I'm a clone of you. I look like you. I know everything about you. I have all your memories. I know your medical history. I've got all your same organs. Nobody would even recognize if you weren't here and I was still here. No one can tell the difference between the two of us. Huh. So the clone starts thinking, if the clone can take you out, the clone can become the original. Boom. You're off the table. And the other issue that I have often seen in pop culture and science fiction about cloning is the other route that it could happen is every time you clone yourself, you get a little bit dumber, a little bit stupider. And eventually your clone gets tired of you putting them through all this work, or you decide that you need more clones, so you start building more and more clones until you just get really, really stupid clones that can't do anything. And then your clones start trying to make more clones because they're like, oh, I don't know how to do this. Maybe if I make a clone, it'll, be able to help me learn how to do this. And eventually, before you know it, you're overrun with clones all over the place. The whole world is just you. That would be a nightmare all of its own, wouldn't it? So, this one is highly theoretical, but there are some interesting things to think about. Like, if who would own the stuff, and how would courts decide on that if clones became a reality? You would have the same name, the same everything. So how would you even, So next, and the last topic for tonight, is I would like to discuss if there would be a mental connection or telepathy with your clone. What do you think? Because, they always said the twins had like a sort of mental telepathy link with each other. And a clone, gosh, that would be a twin on a biological level if I ever saw one, wouldn't it? So I don't really know much about twins, to be honest, but that's what I've heard. This, not to be rude, but that's what the stereotypes say. I don't know if that's rude or not. If it is, I apologize. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just trying to understand how some of this stuff works. And if there are any twins out there and you don't have a telepathic link, tell us in the comments. Let us know. Let us know what it's really like to be twins. Because, I know how, pop culture often presents twins as, telepathic with each other, and they always look identical. But honestly, I've known a few groups of twins in my life. I want to say probably 3 or 4 groups of twins over my years. And only one of those groups actually looked identical to each other. So there's always that. But, would you, if you had a clone, do you think it would be able to communicate with you telepathically? And, because if you had the same genes and the same DNA, why not? But that also leads us to a bigger question. If telepathy is real, and some people believe that it is, how does it actually work? Like, is it literally as simple as you send a thought from your head, like, I like chicken, and then someone else hears the words pop into their head, I like chicken? Would it pop into their head in their own voice, or would it pop into their head in your voice? Like, would they actually be able to hear the voice speaking the thought or thinking the thought? It gets complicated, doesn't it? And like, I also wonder, with telepathy, if it were real, how would that work and stuff? And I'm like, would they understand the difference between their own thoughts and the thoughts of other people if they were telepathic? And when they hear thoughts in pop culture and science fiction and stuff like that, it tends to be disembodied voices. So it often seems to be like in the person's voice who is thinking that thought, is what I've seen most often in science fiction with telepathics. So, if anyone out there believes they have telepathy and would like to get on here and, tell us all about it, we would love to hear about it, and we would love to have you on and, tell us all about how that works and what that's like for you. So this has been my thoughts on cloning and how it relates to AI. So once again, I apologize that we were not able to come back on time because of my kidney stone, but I got my operation and I'm good for now. So I will try to be back next week if I can, but if I'm not, then I will definitely be back the week after that. Thank you all for your understanding and patience. I love you all. And as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny?